Hey, did you know that the word submit doesn't actually appear in Ephesians 5:22? One of the most quoted verses to tell women to submit to their husbands doesn't actually use the word submit in the original Greek. How did it get there? The translators put it there. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you 5 things about submission that aren't actually in the Bible, but yet they've been taught. And at least one of them have been used to keep women in situations that God never sanctioned. So stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what the text says, what the original Greek scripture says, what it actually means, and why the version of submission that most of us have been handed looks nothing like what Paul was describing. So first things first, Ephesians 5:22 in the original Greek, it actually doesn't contain the word submit. In the Nestle Aland Greek New Testament, which is the basis of most modern Bible translations, the word simply isn't there. In the Greek, the verse actually reads, "Wives, to your own husbands as to the Lord." The translators felt like there was a verb that was needed, so they borrowed it from the previous sentence and then just repeated it. In the previous sentence, Ephesians 5:21 is the one that actually contains the word hupotasso. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Probably butchering it. Hupotasso. Basically, that means submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. It's a mutual, both directions for every believer. So the actual command in verse 21, it's actually a mutual submission. And in the verse 22 is one that illustrates what that looks like in a marriage. It's not actually a unilateral command just to women. It's a borrowed verb that's been applied to one relational example within a broader mutual framework. One of the most weaponized verses about women in the New Testament was actually put there by a translator, not Paul. So let's talk about that word, hupotasso. 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 If you know how to pronounce it, please let me know. Comment down below with some phonics. It's a Greek word, and it's a military term that has been formed from 2 words meaning to arrange under. When a company of troops would hupotasso, they would arrange themselves in this formation that was under the leadership of their commander. It became this parade ground term. Here's what's important. A military formation, it isn't just one soldier erasing themselves or herself to the commander so that the commander can exist. It's actually every soldier knowing their position so that the whole unit can function and win. So the submission that Paul is describing is actually one of strategic positioning. It's not silence. It's not invisibility. It's not the erasure of your voice. It's not the erasure of your needs or your personhood. But what it's been turned into is a theological mute button, where anytime that a woman advocates for herself, asks hard questions, or refuses to comply, she's been told to submit. You need to submit. That is not hupotasso. That is control dressed in scripture. While Paul was describing a military formation, the church has turned it into a muzzle. Here's what's interesting about Ephesians 5. In Ephesians 5, the instruction to the wives is 3 verses. 3 verses. The instructions to the husband is 9. And it is significantly more demanding. Husbands are told to love their wives the way that Christ loved the church, meaning to love them sacrificially, love them completely, love them at personal cost, with her sanctification as the goal. Ephesians 5:21 through 33, it must be understood through Ephesians 5:18, which is saying to be filled with the Spirit. The entire passage flows from that command as a result. Mutual submission is just one of the outcomes of living a Spirit-filled life. It's not a hierarchy of dominance. If a husband is genuinely loving his wife the way that Christ loves the church, then submission isn't a demand that he makes. It becomes a response that becomes natural in a safe relationship. The version of submission that has to be enforced, demanded, or weaponized is never describing a spirit-filled marriage. It's describing a power structure. And honestly, some people are going to hate me for saying this, but if he has to demand it, then he's not doing his 9 verses. Let's do a little history backstory on the book of Ephesians. While we obviously live our lives according to Scripture, even for today, it's important to remember that this letter, Paul wrote it to the church at Ephesus. The book of Ephesians is his letter to that church. And in this church, it was a first century Greco-Roman culture that had existing household codes. Basically, women had no legal standing and wives were essentially property. And Paul, he wasn't inventing a new hierarchy. He was actually working within an existing one. And his goal was actually to elevate women's status within it by requiring husbands to love and sacrifice rather than to simply dominate. You see, the revolutionary statement in this passage, it wasn't wives submit, because that was already a cultural norm. The revolutionary statement in this passage is husbands, lay down your life for her. It's pulling this first century cultural application out of context and then applying it as a timeless theological absolute, but without applying the same hermeneutic to the slavery passages that were written in the same letter. And it's a selective interpretation, not a faithful exposition. In other words, we stopped applying the slavery verses to modern life. So we have to ask, why do we keep this one? So now I want to say something that I feel like it needs to be said very carefully, but very clearly. One of the most dangerous applications of misread submission theology, it isn't theological inconvenience. It's real women in real situations that are being told by real pastors to go back to abusive marriages because you need to submit. Now, I know this doesn't happen everywhere, but it's not a fringe occurrence. It's actually been documented, repeated, and it's devastating. Nothing in Ephesians 5, read correctly or incorrectly, sanctions abuse of any kind. And this passage ends with a husband loving his own wife as his own body. And a man who injures his own body is not described as leading it. To the woman who's been told that God wanted you to stay and endure, you've not been given the Bible. You've been given a translation of a borrowed verb that's been filtered through a cultural context, and it no longer exists. And it's been wielded by some with unchecked authority. You see, the text was never the problem. The problem was who got a hold of the text and who wasn't allowed to read it for themselves. So here's what I want you to take from this. Submission is a very real concept in Scripture. But the version that most of us have been handed, the silent, unilateral, non-negotiable, and enforced, that's not what Paul wrote. It never was. What Paul wrote, what he described, was 2 spirit-filled people mutually arranging themselves toward each other out of reverence to Christ. And that looks like safety. It looks like sacrifice. It looks like honor, not control. And if you've been carrying a version of this that has cost you your voice, it's cost you your safety, your sense of self, you were handed bad theology. And you're allowed to put it down because the text was never the problem. The problem was who got a hold of the text, who taught it, who manipulated it, and who wasn't allowed to read it for themselves. And if nobody in your life has ever said that to you, welcome. You're in the right place. If you're in a situation where you feel fearful for your safety, there's help available. Check out the information on the screen. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I'll see you next time.